Kicking off the list at number 10, Giles Corey. Out of the 27 people who had their lives taken away from them during the 1692 Salem witch trials, 19 were hanged, 7 passed away in prison while serving their sentence, and the last victim was Giles Corey. He refused to plead either innocent or guilty, and the law at the time states you can't be tried otherwise. So what they did next was unimaginable. As his tombstone hints towards, Giles Corey was pressed to death. The townsfolk laid a heavy board on top of the 81-year-old man, and then over the course of 2 days, boulders were slowly added, making the weight more and more unbearable. They were hoping that Giles would admit something, either innocent or guilty, but every time they asked him anything, Giles responded with, "More weight." Yeah, how epic is that? Extremely brave. But sadly, after 2 days of this torture, Giles Corey passed away. He fought for so long and did what he did because if he had gone either of the other 2 ways, Giles would have had his property taken away by the town. But since he passed away, not admitting guilt, he was still in full possession of his estate, which immediately went to his son-in-law. Yeah, Salem witch trials. Not the craziest thing that was happening on this list, to be honest with you. Salem witch trials were, yeah, horrible. Pretty horrible thing to look back on right off the bat. Number 9, Ellen Shannon. Heading over to the late 1800s for this one, and I gotta warn you, this one is pretty dark. In 1870, we obviously didn't have the same safety requirements as we do today, like at all. For example, if you wanted to read before bed, you didn't have a Kindle back in the day, you didn't have an iPad, you didn't even have a nightlight, but you did have a kerosene lamp. Ellen had used R.E. Danforth's non-explosive burning fluid, and well, dare I say it, the obvious happened. Her tomb in Pennsylvania reads in memory of Ellen Shannon, aged 26 years, who was fatally burned March 21, 1870, by the explosion of a lamp filled with R.E. Danforth's non-explosive burning fluid. Yes, that's what it actually says. And it's a tragedy. That's a horrible way to go out, don't get me wrong. But I admire that the family boldly put R.E. Danforth publicly as the cause of death here. She put him on blast. Number 8, victim of the beast. Lily E. Gray was buried in Salt Lake City Cemetery back in 1958. This one is quite recent as far as tombstones go. This one is the most common looking as well. It's not monumental. I'm sure many have missed it in time. The message written on the stone back in 1958 says, Lily E. Gray, June 6, 1881 to November 14th, 1958. Victim of the beast, 666. Now see, if that 666 wasn't there, I would be like, oh, maybe she was attacked by an animal, maybe like the beast was a natural phenomenon, like, you know, a surfing term for a large wave, or like a risky mountain trail, something like that. The 666 makes it quite specific on who they're referring to here, so that's pretty haunting. The beast sounds like something sinister, something from the underworld. In the book of Revelation, the beast is literally the Antichrist. Not sure what happened here, but the area was also known to have followers of Aleister Crowley. Crowley also referred to himself as the Beast 666. It sounds like an old Hotmail when you add numbers, doesn't it? The Beast 666. Add me. Number 7, the Ouija board. The fact that you can just buy a Ouija board from a Toys R Us now is hilarious to me. That's so creepy. They have glow-in-the-dark Ouija boards. Yeah, just in case the lights go out and you still want to communicate with the dead. And, you know, glow in the dark is fun. It's like people want to get possessed nowadays, right? Where did all this Ouija board madness start? Well, it began with Elijah Bond. Bond was the first person to ever patent the Ouija board, which is a scary feat in itself. A lot of questions already. But when he was buried, he was laid to rest in an unmarked grave. Now, that was back in 1921, mind you, and it wasn't until 2007 until his resting place got an upgrade. A man named Robert Merck found his spot, raised money to get him a tombstone, and of course, it had to be a Ouija board. Yeah, if you have any words you want to say, any fan questions, bring your own easel, go ask away. Number 6, specimens. Specimens, yeah, not very large either. This one is a very small tombstone. This one is found in a cemetery near an Ohio asylum. There's actually 2 of these headstones. Both of them say specimens. Again, specimens, just that's it. The fact that these stones are the size of a shoebox also makes it even more chilling. This psychiatric facility was the first state-supported asylum in the US. Its history was dark in the early experimental treatment days, so perhaps these headstones could be body parts. You knew I was gonna say that. It's bad. It's all bad. The list gets worse, dare I say. Only halfway. Number 5, Midnight Mary. Mary E. Hart, more commonly referred to as Midnight Mary, had to be featured on this list. Back in 1872 in New Haven, Connecticut, Mary was supposedly buried alive. Yeah, accidentally. It wasn't anything horrible, although this is a pretty dark thing. It wasn't worse. Her stone has a lot of information, all things considered. The massive slab of pink stone reads, at high noon, just from and about to renew her daily work, in her full strength and body and mind, Mary E. Hart, having fallen prostrate, remained unconscious until she died at midnight, October 15th, 1872. Born December 16th, 1824. And then right underneath, there's one line that reads, the people shall be troubled at midnight and pass away. Again, you had us in in the first half. The back 9 gets a little scary. Now, many have noted that this phrase is from the Old Testament, but tales of her being buried alive suggest that there might be a midnight curse hanging about this area. So if you live in this area, you now have a curfew. There you go. You have a curfew now. Go home. Number 4, Mary Jane McCune. Some of the details in this one I can't even talk about here on the Tube of You. It's really dark, really, really dark. Mary Jane McCune was the wife of one James Farrar. She was born in 1838 and passed away later in 1855. Quite young. Now, with many of these tombstones, they can be pretty sparse with details, like specimens, for example. Or you can explain as much as you can in that one block, spread awareness to the public. Like, any lamp mishaps. Both can be haunting to read. Underneath Mary Jane's name and dates is a message on how she passed away. Mary Jane was bitten by a rabid coyote, developed rabies, became violent, and was smothered with feather bed. Wild. The story even recalls that the husband James was away for work at the time and found out what happened only when he got back. That is so tragic. That's the thing with these old resting places. They have tons of information because, well, that was it. That was your legacy. Literally written in stone. It's like so many characters or less to explain how you died horribly. Number 3, Eugene. Humans are odd, okay? Before we get into these last few, the ancient tombstone curses, first we have to look back to 1929 and how not to preserve a mummy. Yeah, let's do it. 1929, Ohio, a corpse just appeared on the road out of nowhere. We love those. There was even an address found on this man's body, but it was an empty plot of land once they followed through. They had no name for this body, so they named him Eugene. Yeah, they named him after a local neighbor. Yeah, hey, we're gonna name this dead guy after you. Is that cool, Eugene? No? Well, too late. They used this body as an attraction. They gave it the mummy treatment, which in Ohio 1929 probably wasn't the best way, but they did it. And then 25 years later, when more and more people started asking about this Ohio mummy, they laid the man to rest. Finally, they officially buried him in 1964. So now when you see this grave, it says Eugene, found dead in 1929, buried 1964. I bet so many people are confused if they saw this. Send them this video and then type, "You won't believe number 3." They're like, what, do you work for MA? What is this guy doing? Why did he tell me to press the thumbs up? Who is this? Number 2, ancient tomb curse. Ancient Egyptian tombs are beautiful. Even after this many years, they're well preserved. Ancient Egyptians believed that false doors were a connection to the dead, and that's how spirits were able to travel here and there. Most false doors can be found in the west wall because Egyptians believed that the west was the land of the dead. The walls of ancient Egyptian tombs are also full of jewelry, art, clothing, basically anything valuable you may need in the afterlife to impress the gods. You're offering up your finest treasures, but with that comes a warning from these gods. One warning trespassers that the gods will wring their neck like that of a goose if you were to steal anything that wasn't yours in these tombs. Inside the found tomb of Ankh-Mahor, for example, who was a pharaoh official 4,000 years ago, inside their tomb a curse was left over. He was buried in Mastaba in an above ground massive tomb, and left on the wall was this warning: "Might do against this, my tomb, the same shall be done to your property." And then it continues to warn trespassers of Ankh-Mahor's knowledge of secret spells and magic, and threatens to fill impure intruders with a fear of seeing ghosts. Yeah, I think that ought to do the trick. Yeah, no way I'm messing with an ancient magician pharaoh. I'm good. I'm definitely all good. And finally, number 1, KB55. Yeah, we'll end this list on an ancient Egyptian tomb, with perhaps the most chilling message left over of all time. This tomb was found, of course, in the Valley of the Kings by Edward Ayrton back in 1907. It was discovered right next to King Tut's tomb. This was a big deal. But the reason we referred to this tomb by a number rather than a name is because, well, we still have no idea who it was made for. Even the walls of the tomb inside, they aren't covered with any hieroglyphs, no artwork, no fake doors. There isn't any clothing laying around, there's no jewelry, it's just bare, which is extremely odd given what I just told you. As you walk down the 20 steps towards KB55, you'll notice only a few markings on the entrance, markings that show that the entrance was widened since it was first cut, along with the ceiling being raised higher. So adjustments were made at some point, meaning this was not a forgotten project by any means, which makes it creepier. The only hint as to who or what is buried remains on the wall, and it's one hieroglyph. That hieroglyph translates to, "The evil one shall not live again." Yeah, I sure hope not. I've seen The Mummy, and I really hope not. I'm all set. Cheers on that one. Number 10, cursed tablets. Exploring ancient ruins is fun until, you find a few cursed tablets. Those kill the mood for sure. Hate those. Back in 2020, around 30 lead tablets were found in Keramarikos, Greece. This was once Athens' main burial ground thousands of years ago, so this is a pretty sweet find. They found the tablets at the bottom of a 2,500-year-old well. But once they began translating the tablets, it makes a bit more sense why they found them in a well. They were cursed, definitely cursed. All of these tablets invoke the gods of the underworld. They implore the gods to cause harm to others. Yeah, imagine this is your first excursion and you find 30 cursed tablets. I'd be like, okay, well, guess I'm quitting. Guess this is my 2-week notice already. Dr. Jutta Storzek, director of the excavation, says they know that these tablets were to curse somebody, but whomever ordered the curse is still nameless. It's almost as if digging up ancient graves is a bad idea. I don't know, hence why we're on to part 2. Let's move on. Number 9, Jon Renie. This next one here, honestly, it's not a bad idea at all. Back in 1832, a Welsh house painter named Jon Renie passed away. His grave is quite unique. There's an inscription on his gravestone that's a grid, a big, massive, like a mathematical grid almost. It's 19 squares across and 15 high. In all of these spaces, there's letters that all make up the line, "Here lies Jon Renie." For years, citizens thought that it was interesting, just a bit of fun to be remembered by. And if that was the case, clearly it worked. Now, thousands of us are looking like, oh, Jon Renie, nice, cool idea. Others have a different idea. Some speculate Jon was trying to trick the devil in order to protect his soul after he passed. That's a bit different than a crossword puzzle, okay? I don't know, maybe the guy just liked wordles. Why does it always have to be something so dark? Why is it always curses? Why is he always trying to juke out the devil? I'll do the same thing for my tombstone, but once you decode mine, it just says, smash that thumbs up. They're like, what does that mean? Number 8, remember death. Yes, can't forget about that. Death and metaxas, can't forget. Turning the calendars back to 1794, a man named James Leeson was 38 at the time of his passing, which for the time is actually not bad at all. His grave is in New York and it's one of the most visited of all times. There aren't any crossword puzzles or anything like that, just a few symbols. So a little bit lighter. That's all there is on an otherwise standard headstone. There's an hourglass with wings, a flaming urn, and a stonecutter's tool, of course suggesting he was once a mason. There's one line at the top that was decoded a century later. In 1889, somebody figured this message out that appeared to be a Masonic cipher somehow connected to tic-tac-toe. Yeah, odd. The message decoded was, remember death. Yeah, we're not forgetting anytime soon, my guy. So now that we know this, those symbols become a bit more eerie. Hourglass with wings, that symbolizes time passing quickly. The flaming urn represents a soul's immortality. Lovely, lovely stuff. I'm just gonna have that cool S that we always used to draw in elementary school. Number 7, Paris catacombs. Yes, of course we have to include some catacomb creepiness in a part 2. These catacombs date back to the late 1700s, okay? When the city's cemeteries were piling up. And I mean that in a literal sense. So officials began moving contents from all over the city. They moved them all around the city to these abandoned mines. The catacombs were then opened in 1809. What a fun family excursion that must have been. Awesome. Bring nose plugs for the fam. They designed the catacombs with the walls of skulls to ensure that visitors would meditate on death. Yeah, I'm sure everybody who visits thinks of nothing else. I'm pretty sure we nailed it there with the wall of skulls. That ought to do it. In order to ensure this was the vibe of the room, there's also a phrase carved above the entrance. It translates to, stop, this is the empire of the dead. Cool, say no more, you got it, I'm on my way. There's also another message right underneath and it says, stop, in the name of love. And you're like, oh, that's a bit nicer. No, I'm just kidding. The second one was a lie. Number 6, a strange warning. Okay, just because we've been talking about graves does not mean that these messages have to be written or drawn out. Sometimes it can be as simple as leaving animal bones on the ground. That's a message that ought to speak for itself, I'd say, no? You see that, I'm like, oh, see ya, on my way. This is your cave, no problem. I'll find the next one over. In St. Augustine, for example, the remains of a donkey were found buried underground. And judging from the skull, it had clearly been hunted down by humans. That's not the mysterious part. The mysterious part is that all of the bones were carefully separated, and there's no marks to suggest that any of these tools were used. So researchers believe this donkey wasn't even used for food. The limbs were placed to point north and south. They used a donkey as a compass. How rude is that? Of all the ways to go out. What if he wanted to point east or west, Give this guy a choice. What if he's not a fan of the north or south? Donkeys in that area of Florida in the 17th century, that's not bizarre by any means, but the way that the bones were buried, that's very odd. That's an odd message right there. Besides north and south, literally pointing, that is. We'll never know. Number 5, mythical carvings. Back in 2014, a 1700-year-old cemetery was discovered along the Silk Road, which are these ancient trade routes, ancient highways rather, connecting China and the Roman Empire. In the city of Kucha, which is now northwest China, this cemetery was found along with 10 ancient tombs, one of which was referred to as M3. M3 didn't have any haunting messages per se, but it did contain several carvings of mythical creatures. There's the white tiger of the west, the black turtle of the north, the vermilion bird of the south, so far so lovely, and then there's the azure dragon of the east. So a little scarier on the back 9 there. That dragon part was a bit jarring. These mythical carvings represent different seasons and the heavens, but what could the other 6 carvings mean? Perhaps depictions of hell? Who's to say? Number 4, the Ring of Sicanianus. 1 ring to rule them all. And by rule, of course, I mean curse you and your entire family. This is why you don't steal from ancient tombs. Right here, listen up. This 12-gram gold ring, for starters, is massive. Its diameter is 25 millimeters, so unless you're wearing some sort of gauntlet, this ring is definitely gonna fall off your finger. Or you're Dave Bautista, then that would probably fit, I don't know. The ring had first been found in 1785. A farmer was plowing a field in Silchester Village, a village west of London known for its grim history. In 45 AD, ancient Romans invaded that same site, and come the 17th century, it was completely abandoned. The ring was mighty and even held an inscription, a Latin inscription, of course, and it read, Senequion vivas in diem. What does that mean? Well, we'll come back to it. When 1929 rolled around, new details surfaced, or resurfaced rather. The data from the ring matched an excavation that was done in the early 1900s, less than 100 miles away. A place called Lydney, that's where this ring is from. At the same site, a tablet was found recalling the Celtic god of healing and hunting, and how his favorite ring got stolen. Yep, there it is, someone's pissed. That's the god right now. He hears me talking about the ring and he's like, give it back. In case you're wondering why this rings a bell, Lord of the Rings was inspired by this legend. The tablet also says, may he who wears the name of Sicanianus not have health until he brings the ring back to the Temple of Nodens. Yeah, let's get that ring back ASAP, please. I would be a lot quicker than Lord of the Rings. Where's this temple? I'm gonna put it in my Uber right now. Number 3, Robert Clay Allison. Sometimes you decipher a message on a tomb and it's peaceful, it's embracing the afterlife, especially ancient Egyptian tombs. The paintings you'll find, they're jaw-dropping. They're gorgeous. And then there's a tomb from the wild, wild west. It's not the same. It's not as much love in this tomb. For example, Robert Clay Allison. This man lived from 1840 to 1887. He was known as a rancher and of course, he loved to duel. On his tombstone, it reads, Robert Clay Allison. He never killed a man that did not need killing. That's so Western. That is the most Wild West tombstone ever. The first time I read that in Sam Elliott's voice. This guy, he loved to duel. I can't even do it, my voice can't go that deep. He loved to duel, I guess, I don't know. But he ended up dying from bad luck. Yeah, a wagon ended up rolling over his head in 1887 when he was 46 years old. What a way to go. The guy also didn't get a headstone for 90 years. And after 90 years, that's the best way they could sum up his entire life. Never killed a man who didn't need killing. Okay. Number 2, message from Egyptian afterlife. We're all curious about what happens after you die, but nobody celebrates the end of life like ancient Egyptians. Like I mentioned earlier, they would paint doors, leave valuables. Any new tomb we discover provides more hints as to what lies beyond. An ancient necropolis was discovered a few years ago in Egypt, and it contains dozens of coffins and a necklace that holds a message from the afterlife. This site is around 2,000 years old, and they're in the process of excavating it as we speak. But so far, the tombs and artifacts found belong to an ancient priestess. A message from the afterlife is pretty spectacular. Just, don't let Rose from the Titanic near the necklace, or else she'll toss it overboard. That was everybody during Titanic. No. Why would she do that? And finally, number 1, Terracotta Army. We're covering all the tombs this week, so of course in a part 2, we have to finish with the Terracotta Army. This is a massive, massive haunting tomb. The tomb of Emperor Qin Shi Huang, China's first emperor. In this tomb, we can find 8,000 statues, but they all have unique carvings on their faces, as if to suggest these are custom statues. All 8,000 of them. The emperor believed that after he had passed on, he would still have to face the spirits of all of his enemies. So he wanted to be prepared even after death. However, the emperor decided to close the tomb forever before the workers even had a chance to get out. He was worried his enemies had found out, so there's now lots of statues and dark history in this one. The dark message here is that the emperor felt like he needed another army for whatever lies after death. That in itself is pretty haunting. Why did he believe that? Why was so much work gone into something for after the fact? Now I'm scared about death. That's great. Look what you guys have done to me. Well, now that I'm fearful of death and what comes after, Guess we'll talk next time. Number 10, the Red Lady. Weird start. Back in 2015, archaeologists uncovered a 19,000-year-old Paleolithic burial site. This is huge. This was the first ever found on the Iberian Peninsula in northern Spain. It was a big deal. They described the findings as the Red Lady of El Muron. Sounds like something from Game of Thrones. There's remains of a woman who we think was around 35 to 40 years old at the time of her passing, and her remains are beside this block covered in red ochre. And remnants of flowers were also found, along with stone artifacts and animal bones. So something was happening. In 2015, archaeologists believe they found her tombstone as well. And it's a limestone block with engravings. Engravings that make the letter V almost. Now this was a time where cave burials, let alone elaborate burials in general, were extremely rare. She also wasn't tucked away in the corner or anything like that. She was in the middle of this cave where many people lived day to day. Why she had a burial like this, why the carved V was there, what the red ochre surrounding her tomb means, well, we've been trying to figure that out for 19 years. Any guesses? Sound off below. We have no idea. Number 9. 2013 Engraving Scandal. Look, I love to joke about history, especially dark history, but given the chance, I would be extremely respectful around these ancient sites, or like ancient tombs, right? The Luxor Temple in Egypt, for example. It's one of the most cherished places on earth. It's ancient history at its finest. Back in 2013, a young boy named Ding Zhaho scratched his name onto a 3,500-year-old piece of Egyptian artwork. Yeah, he wrote Ding Zhaho was here in Mandarin. Look, I'm not shaming the dude, but if you're gonna do a blank was here, do it in your locker. Do it under your desk. Anything is better than ancient artwork. That's wild. I genuinely feel bad for him. He didn't know better really at the time. His parents apologized publicly, and his school website was even hacked. Yeah, somebody mocked him and the vandalism on the school website. So, I mean, yeah, it's a bad idea, but we don't need to Game of Thrones shame the kid, you know what I mean? I'm sure he learned his lesson right from the start. According to the Egyptian Protection of Cultural Relics law, if you engrave, write, smudge anything at a heritage site, you could face jail time. Yeah, 3 months to a year. Yeah, all that for Taylor was here. I'm like, what? I had no idea, really? Number 8. Ancient entanglement. We look back to the ancient ruins of Pompeii for this one. It was once a thriving, beautiful city in ancient Rome, and Pompeii was sadly destroyed in 79 CE. The eruption of Mount Vesuvius buried the ancient city in volcanic ash. Excavation, of course, didn't begin until the 18th century, and then after a full century of careful work, the city was then reopened to the public once again. Now we're uncovering ancient restaurants and finding old graffiti. Pompeii in itself is an ancient burial site. Residents left messages on walls of buildings. There's tributes to lost loved ones all over the city. There's one exchange written on a wall about two men named Successes and Severus. Here's the message. Here we go. Successes. A weaver loves the innkeeper's girl named Iris. She, however, does not love him. Still, he begs her to have pity on him. His rival Severus wrote back. He wrote, "Goodbye, envious one. Why do you get in the way? Submit to a handsomer man, and one who is being treated very wrongly and good looking have spoken. I have written all there is to say. You love Iris, but she does not love you." Yeah, it didn't really make a lot of sense. They tried their best. And then a volcano went off, and then nobody settled their beef. See, this is why you don't waste time in love triangles, guys, or entanglements, okay? This is for you. Just let her go, okay? Let her go, dude. Mount Vesuvius could go off any day, and then what? You were too worried about successes your whole life. No more entanglements, okay? That was so 79 CE. Let's move on. Number 7, handcuffs. Okay, we've gotten pretty dark for the last 2 parts, so we'll jazz it up a bit for our midpoint here almost. At number 7, he says, this comes from an anonymous source online. They joined their friend one shift while they were working at a cemetery. Yeah, see, normally you visit friends if they work at bars or movie theaters or, you know, fun places, but cemeteries, I guess that's a good plug to have too, sure. They were both walking around, patrolling the cemetery, pretty peaceful gig, all things considered, but all of a sudden they saw something left behind sitting on a tombstone. Yeah, dangling off a statue on the grave were pink, fluffy handcuffs. Just waiting. They laughed at the finding. I mean, of course, teach their own, you're not gonna judge. But to this day, they've never figured out just why somebody would leave handcuffs. They don't know who left them or anything about it. To be fair, they didn't ask a lot of questions afterwards. They were going around town asking about the handcuffs. Out of all the memorabilia, we're gonna go with pink handcuffs also to leave behind, really. They're pink, flowers are pink, it's festive, so yeah, maybe it's a nice one. We'll count that as a nice one. Number 6. Book of the Dead, Chapter 17. And immediately back to dark stuff. Here we go. Just over a year ago, the Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities announced the discovery of Queen Neri, the wife of King Teti, aka the first pharaoh of Egypt's 6th dynasty. They found her burial shaft. There were coffins, mummies, artifacts, all that good stuff, dating back to the New Kingdom, meaning the Saqqara necropolis was used in the late period. But now, apparently, it was also used in the New Kingdom as well. That's news to us. That's huge. Perhaps the most most questionable find, like I mentioned earlier, was a 4-meter long scroll. That was the 17th chapter of the Book of the Dead. My personal favorite chapter. That's a good one. Nice big character arc in that one. Funerary masks were also found, as well as miniature boats and 50 coffins. Again, this is the first time 3,000-year-old coffins were found in the Saqqara necropolis, so there's a lot of unknown in this one. Number 5. King Tut's Curse. The new Grand Egyptian Museum opened officially in 2021. And while that's quite recent, the contents displayed inside definitely are not. For the first time in history, King Tut's ancient belongings, the artifacts discovered with him, they will all be on display. Every single one of them. Prior to this museum being opened, we only saw 150 artifacts from his tomb. They took all these pieces on tour and whatnot, but now this museum will house thousands of artifacts. The final resting place for King Tut's collection. Sounds pretty dandy, right? That's over 7,000 square meters. What a display. But not all these belongings bring good feelings, apparently. Many believe we're putting King Tut's curse on full display at the same time. And those who attend the museum will be cursed forever. Yeah, personally, that's a pass for me. Walking through an ancient burial site, I don't know, I've seen Moon Knight. I'm not getting cursed today, my friends. No thank you. Number 4, the animal tombs. In part 2, I mentioned donkey remains found in St. Augustine. Remains that were left behind in an odd way, you could say that. This tomb was found in the Valley of the Kings. This one makes the donkey look much more tame of an event. For starters, this animal tomb was referred to by a number rather than a name. That's a big ancient Egyptian red flag. In 1906, Edward Ayrton discovered tomb KV50, KV51, and KV52, now collectively known as the animal tombs. Sounds a little cooler as well. When officials opened KV52, it was completely empty. That's not a good sign when finding tombs. It was empty except for 2 boxes, both black and undecorated. The larger of the 2 contained the remains of a monkey, and the smaller one was a chest that had 4 compartments and again, completely empty. So what happened here? Where everything went, we have no clue. At that point, you just turn around and not ask any questions. Yeah, I find an animal tomb? Buddy, see you later. Number 3, unmarked grave. This next one comes from an anonymous paranormal investigator. They didn't work at a cemetery, but they would often do walkthroughs. I'm all for hobbies, but leave families alone, maybe. I don't know, just an idea. Nobody wants a guy with a squeaky radio near their family's gravesite, I bet. One grave caught this paranormal investigator's attention. There were trinkets, glass beads, and small figurines almost. Things that didn't really look like toys, but kinda did. The most peculiar were a few tennis balls. What would be pretty jarring to see in the middle of a visit, a pile of tennis balls, they later learned that the first body to be buried in these ancient cemeteries were often dogs. A guard dog, yeah, to watch the human souls when they started to fill up said cemetery. Yeah, walking by a grave with bones and balls, don't be thrown off. Perhaps it was just an ancient good boy. Yeah, rest in peace, little dude. I'll bring a tennis ball next time. Number 2. Jeep tires. Heading over to Barrie, Ontario for this next one. Yeah, so close to home, but why? How could we possibly be talking about this, Taylor? All right, let me paint this picture for you first. Okay, here we go. You bury your loved one in Barrie, Ontario. It's a cold winter's night. It's February 2021. Caledon OPP gets a call that some dude is driving a Jeep around the cemetery. Yeah, guy's just doing burnouts, just testing the capabilities of his 4-wheel drive. Yeah, so you thought the Egyptian art was bad? Somehow even worse is going on in Barrie, Ontario. No gravestones were damaged, don't worry, nothing like that happened. But now we gotta wait 2 springs until these Jeep tire marks disappear. This is so stupid. A 32-year-old Brampton man was behind the wheel for this one. Figuratively and literally. Wasn't out to deface property or anything like that. He just wanted to go mudding. Just wanted to go take her for a rip. You know, grab some Timmies, go give her a rip. Classic. What's Ontario's slogan again? Yours to discover. Nice. No wonder the gravestones weren't damaged also. It was a Jeep. The thing probably just bounced off them. It was like going. The thing got stuck almost immediately also. The guy didn't get away with any of this. It was a complete waste of time. And number 1, unknown caller. Sometimes these messages from beyond the grave aren't in writing. Sometimes there's more that needs to be said. So I just had to include this story from user Summerfield85. I figured it's a good way to end this part 3. I've heard some creepy tales in my lifetime about people who have passed away, but this one, I'm not sure I want to believe it. I don't know, it's kind of eerie. A day after this user's mother passed away, they got a phone call from an unknown number. This was a time where caller ID simply just didn't exist, by the way. You couldn't just answer and be like, oh, it's so-and-so, bye. Things were a little harder to track down. Could have been a prank, yeah, but would somebody ever do this? I certainly hope not. The next day after their mother passed, they received a call. And when they picked it up, it sounded like their mother was on the other end saying, Lolo, question mark? And then they said, Mom? And then the caller hung up and never called again. They recall the voice and how it was exactly like their late mother's voice and how Lo was a nickname she used to call her. The only person to ever call her that nickname as well. She had the same accent and everything. In the following weeks, items related to her mother began to flew across the room as well, which just reinforces this initial haunting call. Oh God. The amount of unknown calls I've ignored on purpose. Ooh. Sorry, Mom.